I will dive in now to this session, which is good and bad business plans, where here we're going to zoom in on that stage where you've thought about your vision and have identified an investor, and it's time to tell them that compelling story and the numbers behind it, and why you need their money. And we're lucky to have a panel of seasoned investors, advisors to entrepreneurs who have seen a lot of business plans and can really opine on what the best practices and things not to do. And so the quick bios well, you've already met David, so I can skip on that. And then Jeff, you just introduced yourself, but he's a board director, CEO, business executive, and venture investor over the last 35 years. He's built award-winning companies in engineering, design, strategic consulting, and investment management. The Conscious Venture Lab Accelerator, which he founded in 2013, was named one of the 10 greatest social impact programs in the world in 2019. And he currently sits on the boards of McKean Defense Group and Hungry Harvest LLC, a food delivery startup, and is a trustee of the James Beard Foundation. Thank you for being here. So yeah, I'm going to start with a very simple, or maybe not so simple question. What do you both think are the most successful or essential success factors of a business plan that lead to investment?
Sure. I'd say a couple things. Make them short. Put in the essential information. Nobody reads a 37-page business plan. And everybody's like, no, but there's one more thing I got to say. It's got to get in there. If people want more information, if they want your detailed financial model, you can send them that after the fact. But you have a certain amount of attention and time. People that are investing are busy. They're looking at a lot of business plans. Guys like Jeff, see a ton of business plans, and they're going to go to a couple key pages. So boil it down to the essence, and find a way to tell your story and make it about you. At the end of the day, you have to talk about your team, but as an early stage startup, people are going to look at you and they're going to go, do I want to bet on her? Do I think she's a winner? Do I think she's going to be successful or not? So tell your story. I've seen so many pitches where it's sort of talking about the market and all that stuff, and that's great, but it's like, why you? What do you bring to the table? Why are you so special? And so I think it's less about the numbers, although the numbers are important, but it's telling your story and your passion and getting the investor to be excited about what you're doing and wanting to be part of it. The other thing I'd say is, I think what makes a successful business plan is, so you lay out your numbers, you lay out your projections. They should be realistic. You might want to dress them up a little bit to make them look better, but then you're setting expectations that you may not be able to follow through on. These businesses are hard, and when you're starting out, you're building a brand, right? So maybe you're not going to make money the first year. Maybe you want to start slow, you want to open up. You don't want to be at your maximum capacity in your restaurant the first week, because it could be a shit show, right? So you have to account for that. You have to account for the fact that you may not be able to hire all the people you want to hire. You may not be able to open for lunch right away. So build that in. And if someone looks at it, at your numbers, and it says you're going to be profitable the first month, they're not going to believe you, right? So make it believable. And I think the other really important thing is when someone looks at your numbers and starts asking you questions about, well, how big is your space? How many seats do you have? How many tables can you turn? What if this? What if that? That you know the facts really, really well, right? So it's not just the numbers that you put on the page are one scenario, but if somebody says, well, what happens if this? What if there's, another shutdown? Maybe, hopefully we won't be dealing with that in our lifetime, but there's a lot of things. These are difficult businesses, and a lot of things happen along the way. And what's going to build confidence in the eyes of the investor are how well you understand what's going to drive revenue and profitability, and how to adapt if things don't go as planned. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a lot to add to that, because it was very comprehensive. I think that philosophically what I would say is you have to remember that although every investor will tell you that what they care most about is the numbers, that's actually not true. Everybody makes decisions with their heart, and then they try to rationalize with their head. Right? So if you've done any thinking, any work around behavioral economics, we all know this is true, and you have to, so to speak, so when he says, tell your own story, I can't emphasize how important that is, right? We don't invest in a lot of restaurants. We don't invest in food businesses. I was in the restaurant business. I love it, but it's just not what we do now. But I will tell you, it's no different. When we see entrepreneurs, I always say, I'm a degenerate horse gambler. That's the truth. I love the horses. I go to Saratoga. I just love it. And I'm always betting on jockeys, right? And we're betting on the jockey, right? In the early stage, particularly in early stage, because the idea probably has a lot of work to be done on it. We help them on that, but we want to invest in an A entrepreneur. I'd rather invest in, we say, someone who's an A entrepreneur with a B idea versus an A idea with a B entrepreneur every single time. So tell your story. It's really important. I was also involved in writing a book with John Mackey from Whole Foods called Conscious Capitalism. It's about this idea of stakeholder capitalism. How do we get everyone engaged in our success? So part of your job as an entrepreneur is to get me engaged in your success, right? I can't agree more that when an investor, a banker, anyone like that, when they're sitting across the table looking at you, we all think it's about the numbers. But at the end of the day, it's about, do I believe David's going to pay me back? Do I believe he's going to do all he can to get me a return? That's a personal story, right? So I can't emphasize that enough. And then the next thing is, the last thing, the thing about, but you also have to know your numbers, right? I mean, we built, when I was doing consulting for the restaurant industry, we built a very, very sophisticated spreadsheet. And the whole thing starts with how many days a week you're going to be open, what's your check average, and how many turns are you going to do? And tell me that story, because everything else is built from that. And then you can do tests on that, right? You can, well, if that turns out not to be true, then what happens, right? But you have to know those numbers cold. You refer to Hungry Harvest, and if anyone, you guys may know that they're in the ugly fruit business. They were on Shark Tank, and they got an investment from Shark Tank. And before they went on Shark Tank, 2 weeks straight, the only thing we talked about was, you have to know your numbers. We knew he knows the story. It was an amazing story. He was going to tell a story. And then at some point, Mr. Wonderful was going to say, hey, and you got to be able to answer that. And he nailed every single one of those. So he told the story. They all fell in love with him. Then he nailed it. And he had people fighting over giving him money. So really important.
And I know, you said the numbers are maybe secondary, although you need to know them. You're given lots of numbers in a model, a deck, but like what do you think are kind of the overrated ones or underrated ones in your opinion? Numbers or metrics or facts about the business plan?
So I have one that and I've been in the business operating for a long time. I owned places in Charleston, in Aspen, in Washington, D.C., Annapolis, a place called the Acme Barn Grill. And I've consulted to a lot of folks. But I think that one of the most important numbers, and it's also underrated, is your rent as it relates percentage to your revenue. Someone gives me a business plan for a restaurant. That's the first, after I decide that there's someone I like and I want to talk to, the first number I'll look at is that number. If it's greater than 8%, I say, sorry, it's not going to work. It's 8. The rent as a percentage of your revenue. So if your rent as a percentage of revenue is greater than 8%, we say, I don't think this thing can make money. If it's 8% or lower, fantastic, then we'll look at everything else. Or if it's greater than 8%, then we want to ask questions about why is that? Have you negotiated this? What are you thinking? How does that work, right? That number to me is one of the most important numbers.
That's a great one. It sort of goes back to what Jeff was saying before, which is how many seats do you have? When are you going to be open? How many turns, right? Because that's at the end of the day, and obviously the rent numbers have to fit into that. If you can't get people in the seats, the number, it's not going to be there, right? So obviously labor is variable. There's ways to run the business more efficiently, manage costs better. There's been a lot done, and I know we're going to hear some tomorrow about technology applications that help you run your business better. But it's food, it's labor, it's rent. It's not that complicated. And the question is, at your price point, at your check average, with the number of seats you have, the number of turns you have, does it make sense? Does it work? Or is it, in some cases, it's just, it's too small. I know someone in the business who says, it all comes down to the number of seats and where you're located, and, the rest sort of flows from that, so.
Anything overrated, not necessarily a metric, or part of the plan that you think maybe entrepreneurs spend more time on than they should, or that's not of the same importance?
I don't know. It's a tough, in some ways, I'm tempted to say, and maybe this is just being provocative, I'm tempted to say the food. You have to, but look, because this is an emotional business, right? You can't, you have to do, but that's sort of the ticket to the dance, right? If you're not putting out a good product, right? I mean, think about what Danny Meyer says, 51-49. I'm looking for 51%ers. 49% is, can I get the right plate to the right person to the right time, at the right temperature, with the right drink, at the right quality. That's 49% of the business. 51% of the business is, how do they make you feel, right? So we see a lot of people that, when you think about that equation, they're putting 90% of the emphasis on the 49%. So that's what I mean by that. You got to put, the 49% has got to be there, right? But that's sort of like, everyone's got to do that. If you're opening a restaurant in Manhattan and you can't do that, you're not going to be around for very long, and that's that. But everyone here who's worth their salt can do that, right? So I would say don't overemphasize that. It's got to be right. But if you put 90% of your thought into that, what I say is 49% of the equation, you might be missing things.
Good, yeah. So for business plans that are not for startups, but for companies looking to raise money in that growth phase and take it to the next level, which is a lot of the folks, and which applies to a lot of folks here, what do you look for in that situation? Not a raw startup, but the next level and what you would need in that business plan.
So if you have a fast casual concept, you have 4 stores, you want to go to 20, right? It's the store level economics, obviously, right? Because if you're not making money at the store level, then you're not going to make it up on volume, right? So does that work? Is it profitable? What do margins look like? And then you're looking at the corporate overhead and what you're going to need to get it to that next stage. So I think it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, really nothing. We're an investor on every table, and that's exactly, the unit economics made sense, and then he had a great plan to expand. He had a really, specific about where he wanted to expand and why, right? So it's just sort of really digging into those details.
Are there any that, and if not any kind of, without revealing who, like plans you've been presented with or seen recently that stood out in a really good way, just to provide maybe an example of one that excelled or a bad way, and kind of why? Just more specific.
I will say that this relates to another question I think that we may talk about later on, which is the social impact question. I will say that we generally don't invest in growth stage, but we were so impressed with the business plan from every table that we couldn't help but get in. And one of the things that we were really impressed by is the way that he was able to integrate his social impact story into the growth story. So it's not about, most people think about social impact, I'm going to make a lot of money, I'm going to give it away. We hate that story. Right? I have a friend who says, Tom's Shoes has been done, we don't want to do it again, right? We don't like that story. What we do like is, Hungry Harvest, when they were on Shark Tank, Mr. Wonderful said, why would you give away, because you buy a box, give a box. Buy a box of food. We work with a not-for-profit in a community that have trouble with access to fresh food. We'll help them through our logistics know-how. Why would you do that? Mark Cuban said, it's marketing costs. You got it right away. It's integrated, right? We know businesses that say, we care about orphans in Africa, so we sell food and then we make money, we give away socks. It doesn't make any sense, right? So we love what I loved about the business plan is how well they integrated their social impact story, which is about funding underrepresented founders, female minority founders, franchisees, funding them and building a model to fund them. Where you can see if he builds a model successful to fund them, that's going to really accrue to his growth, right? And part of the fact that he's got to be so vertically integrated, so growth is a good thing for him. So the whole story really held together. It wasn't, we're just going to do this because we think it's the right thing to do. We're going to do this because it's the right thing to do, but look how it enhances what we're trying to do from a growth perspective.
I guess I'm a little biased because I'm actually an investor in a company called Wico Hospitality, which started with a couple chefs that were renting the apartment over the carriage house of the now CEO, her house. In the pandemic, they were out of work and they started making meals for people, delivering them. And then all of a sudden they're like, whoa, like there's something here, can you help us? And the CEO was then a CEO of a tech company that wasn't going to make it. And she's like, okay, I can help you with this, but you got to understand what you're signing up for. And, they went from zero in March of 2020. They're now at $15 million of sales and growing. And it's a really interesting business model in that it's, they send out an email once a week on Wednesday at 4:30. You have a certain amount of time to respond to order your meals for the next week. And they don't fulfill every order. So there's a sense of scarcity. And it's sort of, even though they've gotten to a decent scale, the feel is like, oh, there's this chef down the street, I'm on this list, I can kind of get you in. It's not, doesn't feel like a big, sort of nationwide company. So they have this sense of scarcity. The other thing that's really interesting is that they, no transaction happens until you've gotten the meal and eaten it. And then after you eat it, you get a text and they say, how was the meal? By the way, it cost us $7.70 to prepare your meal. So please pay us that. And by the way, would you like to add something for us? So the pricing is 100% voluntary. And the average price that people pay, maybe in part because they feel like if they don't pay, if they try to cheap out, they won't get hit on the next list, is like 120% of the cost. So the margins are very, very high. They use a lot of tech, they use a lot of algorithms in how they process orders. And so the business plan was extremely well done. They got started. I was part of a convertible note round when they were like at $5 million, and then they raised $10 million from Bessemer earlier this year, kind of before the market changed. And I think, again, sort of going back to the founder, everyone who I've introduced the founder, whose name is Jennifer Fremont Smith, calls me back and goes, she was amazing, right? So some of it goes back to that founder. It was a great business plan, but if you had a mediocre founder who wasn't competent, didn't know their stuff, you wouldn't have gotten the same response. So that would be my candidate.
And how are you kind of quickly assessing the founder in kind of that interaction in presenting the business plan? Is it just how they, like you say it's a gut, or I don't, what are the right things they're doing that kind of give you that confidence other than the gut?
Yeah, I mean it's pattern recognition, and having seen enough pitches over time and seeing how things play out. I mean, look, these are risky businesses. A lot of them are going to fail, right? So you can have a great founder who's, I think one of the, I don't want to say it's a dirty little secret, but one of the things that makes a great entrepreneur is someone who can get hit in the head with a shovel, and instead of getting up and going, I'm never doing that again, they're like, I got this, I'm good, right? It's the ability, it's a very unique skill to be able to handle failure and not have it crush you. But a lot of it is just being facile with the business model, understanding as opposed to saying, I put together a spreadsheet and I sort of know I put in numbers here, numbers come out there. It's really understanding and usually it's not 20 things, right? It's 2 or 3 or 4 things that really drive the business, and the ability of that entrepreneur to understand that and give you the sense that they have the ability to pull those levers to get it to where it needs to get to. And I think it's also, one of the other things about entrepreneurs generally, not just in hospitality, is there's a balance between being dogged and focused on the vision and understanding the facts on the ground, right? Because you write a business plan, you have an idea, and then you go out and you do it, and it's not working, right? And so you don't want to be flailing and change and change and pivot and pivot and pivot until you get so far away from the original vision. If the original vision is a good one, and it's a business and a service and a product that needs to exist, but maybe you thought DTC was going to be the answer and it's going to be more, brick and mortar retail, whatever it is, it's that balance of, because I've seen captains going down with the ship where they're just like, no, we're going to do it this way, and it doesn't work, and they crash and burn. So it's understanding where to be flexible and but not lose sight of the vision and the reason for the business to exist in the first place.
Yeah, right. Mike Tyson. Everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? But look, I think this is a really great question, and it's a really hard question to answer in some ways, because we have pattern recognition, right? But for us, we're trying to get ourselves out of pattern recognition, right? We're trying to say, what does that entrepreneur that people are ignoring for the wrong reasons look like? So it's a hard thing to do, and we're trying to figure it out all the time. I do think that there's some basics though, right? Confidence without being cocky, right? Because we want, I owned 7 restaurants. I've started 7 businesses, 2 in industries I knew nothing about. I've learned a lot, right? I failed a lot. So I can help you not do the same things that I did, but only if you listen to me, right? So when we say coachability, it doesn't mean you have to do everything I say. It means being open to it. And if you're not going to do something, if I make a suggestion, strongly held suggestion, the entrepreneur can say, I consider that. Here's the reason why I'm not going to do it, right? So I think that this notion of coachability, which gets too much, it gets put on entrepreneurs like it means you have to do what I say. That's not what it means, but it means you have to be open to the idea. You have to be reasonable about, sort of being, your eyes open to the facts on the ground, and then having a conversation with whoever your mentor or advisor may be if you're going to go a different direction. So I think that those 2 things, sort of that confidence without being cocky and that coachability are 2 things that we look for a lot.